Well, welcome to the Helping Families Be Happy podcast, where we explore the often messy world of family love and relationships. I'm your host for this podcast, Christopher Robbins, husband, father of 9, founder of Familias, fly fisherman, and outdoor enthusiast living in the beautiful California Central Valley. Well, we welcome today's guest, Rebecca Green. Now, Rebecca Green, WSM LMSW, is a mental health therapist and a self-help author who writes for both children and adults. Rebecca has written 4 self-help parenting books for adults, including One and Done, The Guide to Raising a Happy and Thriving Only Child, published by Familias in 2023, and Making Friends as an Adult for Dummies, which was published by Wiley in 2024. Rebecca is passionate about helping people of all ages improve their social skills, build community, increase feelings of belonging, and make new friends. She has a special interest in helping only child families thrive and writes frequently about topics pertaining to raising only children. Rebecca's children's books are social, emotional theme stories that empower kids and help them overcome challenges. She's the author of 5 children's books: My Perfect Cupcake, Trick or Treat with Me, Creating Kindness, Explore Virginia with Me, and My Amazing Grand Friend. Her children's books have won a variety of awards. Rebecca lives in Virginia with her husband, elementary school-age son, and her 2 Cornish Rex cats. When she's not in the therapy office or at her writing desk, she loves reading, outdoor adventure, the arts, volunteering in the community, and spending time with friends and family. Today, we're talking about one-child families and how to successfully raise an only child. The podcast aligns with the Familias habits learn, work, and love together. You can learn more about the Familias 10 Habits of Happy Families by going to the Habit Hub blog on Familias.com. For the video of this podcast, please view it on the Familias YouTube channel. With that, we want to welcome Rebecca. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me today.
You are more than welcome. Now, this is a little odd because as the host, I happen to be a father of 9 children. But growing up, my parents divorced, and I basically grew up as an only child. So I have kind of a unique perspective of what it's like to be the only one, as well as just be completely outnumbered. But let's talk. What are some of the common concerns that parents have with only one child?
Well, I think there's really a unique set of concerns that many parents of only children have about raising an only child. And these include, in no particular order, that their only child will grow up lonely, that their only child or selfish, that their child might have some social skills deficits, such as being socially awkward or socially inept. So many parents worry about the social development of their child without having daily interactions with siblings at home. They often have worries far in the future about what happens when they become elderly and they need care, and their only child is the sole caregiver and doesn't have any siblings to spread out the caregiving responsibilities with. And last, sometimes they worry about spending too much time and attention on one child and whether that can lead to a child feeling like they're constantly being scrutinized or that they're always sort of in the spotlight, which sometimes can lead to feelings of anxiety or perfectionism. So those are kind of an overview of many of the concerns that parents of only children share.
Okay, well, that seems like a lot. So let's focus on one of those. How about, I think you reference it as the lonely onlys. So should we be concerned that our children are lonely as the only child of a family?
Well, the stereotype of the lonely only started in the late 1800s and through the decades and even in the present day. And, if you go on any support groups for only child families or discussion forums, worrying that their only child is going to be lonely is top of mind for many parents because they're worried that without daily interactions with siblings at home and growing up with, getting practice, working through conflicts with siblings, and with only children spending a good deal of time alone, they worry that, with all of those factors combined, their child might grow up to feel lonely, might grow up to feel different. But the good news is that many of these parents' worries are completely unfounded, because studies have shown that only children are actually no more lonely than children who have siblings. So all children feel lonely from time to time, and loneliness isn't necessarily a bad thing if it occurs once in a while. It's when it becomes chronic and more of a daily phenomenon. That's when parents should definitely take note and, maybe be concerned. So there's a few strategies and suggestions that I have for parents of only children that if they're worried about their child being lonely, there's things that they can start doing very early on to reduce those chances. It's hard to prevent it entirely, but there's certainly strategies that parents can do to reduce their chances. So one strategy is to start the socialization of their only child very early. So this can take the form of being intentional with play dates. So many times, play dates can be spontaneous, like if a child, has other children and neighbors to play with in the neighborhood, and they're just going out to play and finding other kids who are also outside, and they get together and play outside. Or play dates can be more intentional, such as setting up play dates with your child's classmates. So getting in contact with their parents and setting up play dates for your child when they're younger, or making sure that they do a few activities after school and on weekends, so that when they come home from school, they have structured things to do, especially if they don't have similarly aged friends in the neighborhood that they can spontaneously get together with. Team sports are an especially great activity to get an only child involved in, because they have the team environment. It can be very family-like. And because team sports tend to last many months, or even more than one season, and year after year in many cases, only children can really build wonderful family-like relationships with their teammates. And that's something that I personally wanted to make sure that my son, who's an only child, got involved with very early on. So I involved my son. He's very active and involved on an ice hockey team. And he has been doing that since he was 4 years old. And it's what's nice about it, it's the same team at the same ice rink that he's been with for 7 years now. And so over those 7 years, he's gotten to know the other kids really well. The team lasts 10 months of the year, so it's a good chunk of time to get to know the other kids. And it's really created this wonderful family involvement that he can do outside of school. So it's really been a wonderful experience. But besides teams, any kind of extracurricular activities, any kind of sports, the arts, theater, music, music lessons, things like that, both after school and on weekends, as well as Sunday school, church involvement, any kind of religious activities are also great. So getting your child involved in these structured activities early on is a great way to reduce the chances of loneliness. Another thing that's really helpful in reducing chances of loneliness is being clear on the differences between solitude and loneliness. So a lot of people confuse the two. They kind of feel like solitude and loneliness might be the same things, but they're actually very different. So solitude is when someone is content being alone. They're really enjoying their own company. The child might be fine playing alone for, specific periods of time. They've got their toys, they've got their creative, art supplies or imaginative play supplies, and they're content playing alone. And they're content with their own company, and they're not necessarily longing for other children or other people to be around. And that's a really healthy way to, help your child get comfortable with being alone. Now, loneliness, on the other hand, that's when somebody is alone and they don't want to be, and they're feeling a lack of human connection and companionship. And so, some red flags that your child might be experiencing loneliness is if they are, constantly bringing up not having a sibling, like on a daily basis or multiple times a week. If they're begging mom and dad to have a sibling, that can be a clue for the parents that, maybe my child's experiencing loneliness. Maybe I need to do more to help them feel more comfortable in their solitude, be more intentional in scheduling play dates for them, get them more involved in some extracurricular activities, things like that. So that's, one thing that when I'm working with even my own therapy clients in therapy, because I have many only child families that I work with, I let them know that look for that red flag. If your child is bringing up frequently that they're, pining for a sibling, think about what might be lacking and how you can fill that void with play dates and more social opportunities and more activities for your child.
So this has been very helpful to think about all the different opportunities that exist to help our only child be engaged in great activities that are both educational, they're developmental, they're improving their bodies, their minds, their artistic endeavors. There's just so much there. Now, you've touched on, getting them engaged, but you also at the very beginning suggested that there can be a temptation or maybe a concern of overscheduling or overstimulated or being just too much for one child. How do we deal with that?
Well, I think being overscheduled is a big topic these days among parents and on parenting forums. And the fear is that if a child has multiple activities per week or even an activity every day or even more than one activity every day, which in some metropolitan areas and some communities is common, that they'll get so used to always having every minute of their free time scheduled that they might not learn how to productively spend their free time. They might start to feel anxiety if they're not having every moment of their day scheduled, and they might not learn how to productively manage their free time. Many parents worry that if kids are overscheduled, they won't have enough time for free play and unstructured play opportunities, which are so important. So finding a balance is really healthy. For instance, what parents can do as a practical strategy is start with one or two extracurricular activities, especially for very young children like preschoolers or early elementary. Start with one or two activities, see how that goes. You can see if your child seems overscheduled. Do they seem exhausted? Do they seem drained? Do they dread going to the activity? Do they complain about the activity? Or on the other hand, do they seem to want more? Are they asking for more activities? Are they asking for more play dates? So you can kind of, start out with one or two, and then gradually, if it seems like the right fit for your family, add more.
Hmm. Well, that sounds pretty helpful. I know what it's like to have the need to feel productive all the time. Yet I have learned how important it is to have those moments of mental respite, physical respite, that some of the most creative solutions we come up with are when we're not being productive.
Mhm. Absolutely. That is so true. Absolutely. I find for myself, if I've got something on my mind and I take a walk and I don't have, my phone with me and I'm just being very mindful of all the sights and the sounds and everything on my walk and having a cleared mind, that's when so much creative inspiration tends to happen.
Well, do you have any examples, perhaps little case studies that you could share with us of how you've seen a one child family, perhaps they were leaning one way or another, and how through your work you've been able to help them have a more balanced approach and how that really helped that child?
Sure. Well, In terms of families making the decision about whether or not to have one child, it's such a complicated decision with so many variables. And for some families, the decision is made for them. They might be experiencing infertility. They might have had a medical issue that makes it impossible for them to have more children, or age. The age of the parents might be a factor, or financial considerations. So in some cases, many families do proactively decide, one child is the right fit for us. In other cases, the decision is made for them. But there's so many factors that go into this, such as, what the environment they grew up in, what their family and community expectations are. But I think what can really be helpful is for the parents or the single parent to really do a lot of self-reflection, a lot of soul searching, a lot of, thinking through the practical implications of having one child versus having multiple children, working with a therapist to help them do a lot of processing of these issues, and self-reflection can also be really helpful, as well as reading my book, One and Done, can be really helpful to, especially for parents who are kind of on the fence or right at the beginning of the process. Thinking through all the different variables and different situations that my book lays out can be really helpful in helping them decide which side of the fence they'll end up being on.
Right. That's a great resource. Now, for our audience, One and Done, the guide to raising a happy and thriving only child, can easily be found at familias.com or wherever books are sold. Now, Rebecca, before we leave, is there a piece of advice that you just want us to know that you haven't covered yet?
I think, a lot of people are very curious about adult-only children. And they wonder, for adult-only children looking back at their experiences growing up as an only child, do they view the experience positively or negatively? And I've always found that to be a really interesting question, because I myself am an adult-only child. And with the only children who I've spoken with, the adult-only children, overwhelmingly, the majority of them had a very positive experience and felt that the benefits of them growing up as an only child far outweighed the drawbacks. And of course, there are some negatives and some drawbacks of being an only child, but they felt that the time and attention their parents were able to give them, the resources they were able to make the most of, and just, having so many benefits, they're big fans of the experience, and they really recommend the idea of, considering having one child for all the many benefits. So I think that that's something that a lot of people often have questions about, that I just wanted to end our discussion with.
Well, I think that's very helpful, and I think everyone should have a lot of confidence that no matter what kind of family you can have a happy and thriving family. Well, it's been wonderful to have you with us. Now, Rebecca, where can our guests find you online?
Oh, sure. Well, I have a website. It's www.rebeccagreen, and that's green with an E at the end, author.com. So that would be a great place to find me online. And I welcome readers or listeners to contact me through my website. And, if you have a question, if you have a comment, if you want to know more about this topic, I welcome readers and listeners to contact me anytime.
Wonderful. Well, as we conclude today's podcast, I'd like to thank Familias for its support in bringing the podcast to your ears and your heart. We'd be thrilled if you subscribed to the podcast and left a review. And when you're ready for that next amazing book adventure, we'd be honored if you chose a book from Familias. One step at a child, one step at a time, one child at a time, we can make the world a happier place.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you.